Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Pools Pod. Today, it's a bit of a Hartlepool Mail special. We're joined by the past and present of the Mail. We've got Sam Lee, who worked at the Mail between 1999 and 2005. Those dates will be very happy memories for some people associated with Pools. I assume all people associated with Pools. And the present of Hartlepool Mail, which is Robbie Stelling, who's worked at the Mail since January of this year. Hello, people. How are we today?
All good here. Yeah, nice to see you boys. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, all good with me as well. Not such a glorious time covering pools for me so far, but let's hope that we're going into the new year with a bit of optimism.
We always have optimism. As Hartlepool
Exactly.
United fans, that's all we've got is optimism.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to change over the decades. I had a really, really good period. Like you say, I think I joined in 1999 at the Mail, and previous to that, I'd done work experience back in the early 90s when I was at journalist college. So I did a couple of years then as well, in the Mick Tate era. So I joined when Chris Turner was manager. And in 99, halfway through the 98, 99 season, when we just avoided relegation. And then I did 5 seasons of either automatic promotion, or my last game was at Cardiff. Um,
Wow.
when when you'll all remember that well. Or you might remember, I don't know if you remember that well. I'm not sure how old we are, but yeah, it was a big one. I think I kept hold of my resignation letter just to see if we were going to go on the championship because there was a few grounds I hadn't been to. So
Mm.
I went in the day after and said that's enough for me.
Well, my greatest hits so far include 7-1 defeat to Gateshead, which was my
Yeah.
second game covering pools. The contentious departure of Kevin Phillips, the even more contentious departure, or the even more contentious reign of Darren Sarll, rather the
Yeah.
FA Cup fourth round exit. But it's finally I feel that there's a bit more positivity. I mean, I'm obviously in and around the group, not just on match days, but in the week, and it feels like there's a real change in the mood. And I think you can see that on the pitch. The performances are, I think there's still plenty to work on, but there's more there's more positivity in the way they play. I think they're far more on the front foot. I think they're far more cohesive as a unit in and out of possession. And I think you see that, just chatting to some of the players. I think sometimes less is more, a bit less tactical instruction, a bit less pressure on their shoulders, perhaps. And yeah, that's been great. So I'm still hoping. We were just talking about the FA Trophy exit, but I'm still hoping I might end up at Wembley at the end of the season. Not getting ahead of myself, of course.
Well, it's a dream for us all, isn't it? I suppose. I
Yeah,
mean, to be fair, we've
exactly.
joked on a previous podcast that if we do get to Wembley or if we get the playoff final, the FA will see fit to move it away again just to annoy us all,
Of
probably
course
to
they will.
Plymouth or somewhere like that. So we've got a nice journey ahead of us. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question for different reasons. The next one, as I said, you both cover polls, you both got memories, I would suggest good and bad. I would suggest more good for Sam than they are for Robbie, given the tenures that you both had and where we've been. So, as I said, it might be difficult for different reasons. Robbie, if I ask you the question, you might struggle to think of a positive one. And Sam, you might struggle to narrow it down to a positive one. But yeah, so is there any particular highlights you've had, Robbie, in your case so far, covering polls, and Sam, in your case, from your tenure? As you said, you've experienced many highs with promotions, attempted promotions, daylight robbery at Cardiff, and anything else. So is there any positives that you can think of specifically?
Yeah.
Um,
I was just sorry, I was just going to say, as I could have gone first on the positives if you
you
want.
better, Sam, I think.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, like I say, all of my full seasons, all 5 of them were either automatic promotion or promotion. Obviously, the first year was when we went out on penalties, and then the year after, that was a Preston, wasn't it? Goodness, where were we first? And then we went to Tranmere, and we had obviously Richie missed his first penalty and then stuck up and got up and took the winner at Tranmere, and that was an amazing night. And everything like I'm wondering what the camaraderie is like in the dressing room now from Robbie, because that was the thing that drove Hartlepool United. They were best friends on and off it. Like they went out together, they socialised, their families, everything socialised, and they were such good friends that they really wanted to fight for each other. When one lost the ball, the other would be, picking it up. And it was such a good era for yeah, we had great players as well. They were really good players. But you have to have that team spirit to take you places when you're Hartlepool United, because we're never going to have fantastic players. I mean, I've been watching Hartlepool since the 1980s, and we never, unless we got, I don't know, Ryan Reynolds money, sir, we're never going to be able to afford to bring in. And I think we bought one player in those 5 years that we were there. I think the only player we paid for was Daryl Clark for about 70 grand from Mansfield. And other than that, they were all free transfers and stuff that we got. So it wasn't like we'd gone out and purchased like really expensive players. But when they just all worked together. And every one of them had their own thing that could change a game. We had Hugh Robertson and his free kicks, and we had such an engine with people like Tony Sweeney, and we had Adam Boyd and his skill could change a game. We had Gordon Watson, Avian Williams and his goals against Darlow. I could go on forever about the positives, but you were talking before about the re-election years as well. I do remember a few of those, and they've never, we had some great players in those teams as well, but for some reason it wasn't gelling. And now, yeah, if you get the right manager and you get the right players and they're all just coming together. The town was buzzing at the time, and I really think the success of a football team has a massive positive impact on the success of the town and how people feel and how people go about their business. So I really want to see us up again. It's so important to have a football club in the football league for your town. So yeah, what's the camaraderie like, Robbie?
Yeah, it's an interesting a few interesting points there, Sam. I think you're dead right about the success of the football club is often influences the sort of atmosphere in and around the town. I think especially as a relative outsider looking in, this year has been the first year I've lived in the town in all my life, and it does feel like one of those places where the football club is really at the heart of the town still. You don't get that, I think, in a lot of places nowadays. Obviously, in the National League, you have a really interesting mix of former football league clubs like Hartlepool, like Southend, where we were last week, like Yeovil, where we're going to be, and you have clubs that have never been in the football league, that have, with respect to them, lesser infrastructure, smaller fan bases. Think of the likes of an Ebbsfleet or a Braintree or a Dorking where we were last season. So you have a really interesting mix. But I think Hartlepool, along with two or three others, really stands out in terms of that. The town and the football club are in many ways one and the same. And even in my time supporting pools, maybe not so much covering them, you can really feel how important both the football club is to the people of the town and vice versa. I mean, when we were promoted back into League Two and the COVID restrictions had ended, I mean, the atmosphere there was incredible. I remember when we played Carlisle, it must have been a handful of games into the season, and the atmosphere was absolutely brilliant. And I think that's one of the big challenges facing the club now, is how do you get the fans back into the ground? There's obviously some dissatisfaction with a lot of the decisions that have been made over recent years. The season ticket prices, of course, increased over the summer as well. But above all, the football has to be exciting enough, compelling enough, competitive enough to get people to want to part with their hard-earned money. At the start of the season, we really didn't see that, did we? I mean, they had quite a bright start under Darren Sarll, but he was so focused on defensive structure and organisation, and it came at such a cost in terms of the attacking football. No home goal in almost 7 hours. So it's no surprise that we haven't seen attendances as high as the club might like them to be. In terms of the camaraderie within the group, I would say, I mean, in my short time covering the club, there's been a huge turnaround of players. I think last season they had something like 15 or 16 loan signings. They had a number of players that they brought in just for 1 or 2 months as well. And I don't think that helps the cohesiveness of the group. Of course, in the summer as well, they had a big turnaround of players. Again, I think people would maybe say that that was necessary, but long-serving players like Tom Crawford were moved on, and they were in many ways what we don't see. They were the heartbeat of the dressing room, and so that changes things. I've always said that I got on really well with Darren Sarll. He was perfectly pleasant to deal with from a press point of view, but I certainly felt like there was a different, more pressurized atmosphere in the dressing room. And I think that's maybe one of the things that Lenny Lawrence and the new coaches, Anthony Limbrick and Gavin Skelton, have done best of all, is to cultivate that atmosphere. And Lenny won't thank me for bringing this up, but he turned 77 last week, celebrated his 77th birthday with a trip to Southend. I think most 77-year-olds heading to the Essex coast would be doing so as part of a sort of seniors tour group. But Lenny, of course, was in charge of the in charge.
You're right.
Of
I don't think he'll thank you for that.
No, I hope he doesn't listen to that bit. But he has been a real pleasure to deal with, and I think I asked him what's been the secret to success. His first managerial job was in 1978. That was before Anthony Limbrick was even born. And what has been the secret to his longevity, I suppose, and also what have been the key principles that have allowed him to remain relevant, I suppose, for so long? Because of course, as we know, football is an ever-changing landscape. And he said, I'll always be honest with the players, and I will always try my utmost to foster a mutual respect. Because as he said, if the players, his exact words were, if the players aren't having you, then you've got no chance. You have to have the players on side. And I think Darren Sarll probably lost the dressing room and the fan base pretty quickly. But certainly from what we see, I think Lenny Lawrence has all the players pulling in the right direction. For a number of players, it looks like the weight has been lifted off their shoulders. I mean, consider David Ferguson and how much he struggled at the start of the season, to the point where he was made a bit of a scapegoat. I think now we've seen he's got that renewed freedom. You look at someone like Adam Campbell, who really struggled at the start of the season, again, massively improved under Lenny Lawrence. And I think a lot of that is just being given that renewed freedom. But it certainly does strike me as a group of players that get on really well. I think there are a number that sort of embody that Hartlepool United spirit. I think of Nathan Sharon. We've seen him play in loads of different positions. He's played 25 games in a row now. He always gives 110%. He never stops running. In front of him, Luke Charman as well. I think very similar. There's that spirit that I think, again, as a southerner in the Northeast, that is sort of that spirit. It is unique to the Northeast in a way. And I think, Sam, as you were saying, it might not always be about having the very best players, but if you can have the very best group, the very best determination, the most heart, you're not going to win leagues, win promotions just based on spirit. You obviously need to have quality in the group as well. But if Pools can find that mix, and I don't think it's impossible that they can, because certainly the signs
points, though, doesn't it? You know, those people who run for those extra balls, like you said,
are
you'll
massive.
pick points up over the season with that heart.
Most certainly you will. Most certainly, especially again at National League level. And I don't think there's a huge disparity between National League and League Two. But if there's one thing I think we all know, is there's many different ways to win a game. And there's not going to be many sides at this level that are going to, have 70, 80% possession every single game, especially in the winter and autumn months, where you go to all sorts of pitches. You've got Tamworth's artificial surface, you've got pitches that start to cut up and things like that, and can be difficult to play on. There's loads of different ways to win games. And as you say, Sam, I think if you're willing to run that little bit harder, close down that little bit more aggressively, more quicker as well. And that's a surefire way as well to get the fans on side. And as we know, the fans really are the beating heart of Hartlepool United.
That's very true. I mean, you mentioned there about the disconnect between the manager, the dressing room, the fans. It is very important. It has seemed important in the past, where when the fans have a connection with the manager, with the players, when the manager has seems to have that connection with the players, that does tend to be when we do better, doesn't it? You look at Dave Chalner as the most recent example, I think, of our success. The connection that he had with the fans in that season, obviously, a lot of it was sort of behind closed doors, if you like, but there was a connection there between him and the players, and you could see that on the pitch when you were watching from home.
Yeah, same with Ronnie Moore, Chris
Very
Taylor,
true.
Cooper, they all have that uh, fans players wanted to play for them, didn't they? And another one I dealt with was Mike Newell, who didn't have a very good rapport with the fans or the press, but the players liked him and the players still played well for him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to be
massive.
fair to Mike Newell as well, he came in the November of that season, and he's one of those managers, and it's not just a Hartlepool, you get them at every club. He feels like he was here for much longer than he was because of the success that he had. But obviously, he was only here for, you know, say about 7 months or so, got us promoted and then left. But clearly, the connection was there, if you like, because he got us up. And it's very rare that you see teams who go up, teams who win things, teams who are successful that don't have that connection between each other.
Yeah, I suppose the team was pretty together when he came along. Mike replaced Martin Scott, didn't he?
Chris Turner.
Did he come? Did Mike come before Neil Cooper? I'm trying
Yeah,
to
so Chris
think.
Turner was the end of the 20th century into the promotion season. Mike Newell took over for the remainder of that season. Then
Right.
Neil Cooper took over when we got promoted to League One, and then Martin Scott came in when Neil Cooper was strangely parted ways with the club
I thought
two games before the end of the season.
they won the departures around that time.
To be
So
fair, we've gotten more used to that over the years, haven't we? I suppose.
yeah, there was some odd departures at that time, but yeah, Neil was certainly one of them. And a lot of like went on behind the scenes, I think, with that. But God bless him. Yeah, Neil, the fans absolutely loved Neil, and his laughter and everything was infectious on the side of the pitch, and his enthusiasm and stuff. But yeah, Mike Newell was tricky one to interview sometimes.
Fair enough. I mean, to be fair, I mean, you look at that time, the success that we had, the managers that we had, and the team that we had as well, the likes of Joe Porter, Adam Boyd, Effion Williams, the front three that we had, going back a little while to Gordon Watson and that era as well. Was there any players in particular, because you've mentioned the managers and their interviews, was there any players in particular that you found easier than others, or were they open with their words?
Yeah, no, I suppose I'm also from a different era from Robbie. So when we wanted to speak to a player, we picked up the phone and phoned them, usually with a landline at the time. But yeah, and we just, so obviously, like Robbie, I had to speak to them every day, to speak to the manager every day. You have a couple of pages a copy, and then we had the football mail. I didn't have the internet to deal with at the time. I just had the football mail and the paper 6 days a week, and we had three editions of the Mail. And so when I wanted to speak to the manager or the players, I would pick up the phone them, do an interview, and it would go in the paper the next day. Now, and so I would have to build my own rapport with them. I didn't go through press officers and things like that with questions. And if I wrote something that they didn't like, then it was up to them whether they spoke to me the next time. And everyone was pretty fair because I would go and stand outside the dressing room the next week. And if I had said, that they had a rubbish game the week before, then I had to justify that to their faces. And it was usually the thing that they always picked up on. And I didn't fall out with anybody. We had, they were great with me. They were really kind people. They'd always make time to have an interview, even if that we'd lost and stuff like that. But it was always the marks out of 10 that got them. Why did you give me a 6 last week? Because I was being kind, it should have been a 5, but
I
Fair enough.
I can absolutely relate to that, Sam. Yeah, it's slightly different in the modern how we do things. We've obviously got Josh Yule, who's the press officer, who a lot of the time we will go through. So most of the time when we're speaking to players, it's in a slightly more controlled environment. Darren Sarll was actually pretty forthcoming in terms of outside of that environment. He was always happy to chat. I think he he made a point of getting everyone's mobile number, speaking to us on the phone whenever. I would certainly say we still do the player ratings, and obviously we also put them online, and they're one of our most popular items that people love to read, for better and for worse. And unfortunately, fortunately, I think a lot of the players still read them. And yeah, I'm always mindful of the marks, because I think, in a sense, if someone's had a really poor game, especially in the age of the internet, you want to avoid a pile on. I'm always loath to single someone out for criticism, but obviously, especially this season, the number of red cards that we've had, it's been quite difficult to justify giving high marks for those players. I would say everyone, just to go back to your question, Jack, about who in terms of it has been good to deal with in the modern era, they're all brilliant to deal with. Manny Disarua, I always say all the time, because he scores so many goals, he always seems to be the one stuck up for the press as well. I think he might, if there is ever a benefit of him having a dry spell as he did at the start of the season, it's that he doesn't have to speak to us quite as often. He is a real pleasure to deal with. Such a smiley character, again, hugely popular in the dressing room, big personality, but not one of those who feels as though he has to scream and shout to make himself heard. Just a fantastic guy, got time for absolutely everyone. I was speaking to Nicky Featherstone last week, obviously a real Pools legend. My dad is the number one member of the Nicky Featherstone fan club. I was on his behalf trying to persuade him to play for another 600 appearances or whatever, and I'm not sure how far I got on that one, but Nicky's a fantastic guy, another one who doesn't feel as though he has to be the loudest in the room in order to be a leader. Joe Gray, David Ferguson, Adam Campbell, Jack Hunter. There's loads of Nathan Sharon. They're all fantastic guys, really, and that counts for a lot in terms of the marks and whatnot. We interviewed Gary Medine for the first time in a while after he'd scored his opening goal against his first goal for the club against Fylde. And he was doing the radio interview before he got round to us. And he mentioned in that radio interview that he had been reading someone had called him unfit. And as soon as he said that, I knew that it was me that had called him unfit. And so I was sort of twitching around in my starting to sweat a little bit. And I was just thinking, oh, I hope that the fellow, my colleagues, the rest of the press corps are not going to throw me under the bus here. And so once the radio interview got done, what did everyone do? Pointed the finger straight to me. But it's one of those, you have to strike that balance between being respectful to the players, but also being fair. I always try and say it as I see it. And to Gary Medine's great credit, I think he felt that he might not have liked to have read it, but I think he felt that it was a fair criticism. He probably wasn't as fit and as sharp as he might have liked to be when he first signed. I tried to temper my comments with the fact that, well, he hasn't played a competitive game for 16 months prior to signing for Pools. So you can't expect him to be 100% match fit when he makes his first appearance. And actually, Gary Medine's a great character. Obviously, got some fantastic stories to tell from his life and career in football. And another one who's got a lot of stories to tell, Kazenga Lualua. When we first met him, I tried to ask him a question, because the radio tends to go first, and rather than repeat the same questions as what the radio just asked, I try and give them something a little different. So I was trying to waffle through a question about what keeps him motivated at 34 years old, having played at such a high level, having played in the Premier League, played in the Championship. What keeps him motivated to keep going at a National League club? And I think he thought that I was suggesting he should retire. Because his only real response was, "I'm not that old," and I was very red-faced for the rest of that interview. But all the players and management as well, Lenny Lawrence, Anthony Limbrick, we've had a few chances to speak to him, and Gavin Skelton as well, have been really good to deal with. And I think that fans and players alike will recognise good people. Again, it's not all about being universally liked. Being a nice guy doesn't necessarily make a good manager, but I think if you can be honest, fair, and reasonable, inevitably you're not going to keep every player in the squad happy. Inevitably, supporters are not going to agree with every decision you make. But I think if fans and players alike can get that sense that you are trying to do your best for the club, that you're making decisions in the best interest of the club, that you're willing to adapt and make changes when needed, that you've got your principles as well, then I think that they will get behind that. And I think if you look at the managers that have been successful in it over the last 20, 30 years, most of them have been the ones that have had that good rapport. And if you look at the managers that have been unsuccessful, especially in the last sort of decade or so, we've had an incredibly high turnover of managers. I think those are the ones that have failed to connect with the town, connect with the people, and connect with the players.
I've just checked BBC as well because you mentioned Gary Medine, and
Mm.
instantly I mean, there's two things that he's done in the main since he's been here. He scored that first goal. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone can complain about the awarding of that goal to him. No, like it was
Mm.
definitely his goal. The second one, BBC still have it as Gary Medine's goal.
Well,
That was not Gary Medine's goal, was it?
Jack, having called him unfit the previous time I saw him, you bet I wasn't going to take
It
that
was
goal
him.
away from him. He can have another. He can have as many goals as he wants for the remainder of this season.
I admire the sitting on the fence there.
Yeah.
Sam, did you go to that game? Have you seen that goal?
No, I missed that goal. I listened to you argue about it last week, though, on the podcast. I must go and have a look.
Honestly, I will go to my grave saying that wasn't his goal. But hey ho, I mean to be fair, you're a striker, you claim those, don't you? You'll claim anything if you're a striker. You want the goals,
Of course you do.
and you can't blame him for that either, say with him being off for so long. The other thing as well, you mentioned Lenny Lawrence, Anthony Limbrick, Gavin Skelton, the management team as it's now been
Mm.
put. Um, is it, and I'm not saying you have any inside knowledge, but is it,
Mhm.
in your opinion, set up for Anthony Limbrick or Gavin Skelton, probably Anthony Limbrick to take over at the end of the season?
I would suggest so. Again, I'm not privy to any inside information. Obviously, Lenny is 77. I've already called him old once. I'm certainly not going to do so again, but we would suggest that it's probably unlikely that he's going to stay in the role for more than another 18 months. I think when he took the job at first, you probably would have said until the end of the season would have been the maximum. Of course, if Pools do go and get promoted, then it's going to be interesting. How are they going to manage that? That would certainly be an interesting one. Lenny said to us last week that he loves football and he doesn't like playing golf or sitting on the beach. So perhaps he is going to be keen to maintain in one form or another in and around the club. And I think he's a massive asset. And I think for now, the dynamic, which is quite unusual at the time, I think most people were fairly skeptical. It wouldn't be unfair to say quite how it would work. The dynamic seems to work really well. Lenny cultivates the atmosphere. He's got massive experience. He's also got a long list of contacts. We've obviously seen people come in on loan from the likes of Crystal Palace and Charlton, his former clubs, and he obviously has a massive influence there. He picks the team. He is in charge of deciding on the tactics, and then Limbrick and Skelton obviously do a lot of the day-to-day coaching. That's not to say that Lenny doesn't do a lot of the day-to-day coaching as well, but they're very hands-on in the week. Limbrick obviously adds that new, different voice in the dugout as well. He's quite he doesn't mind a bit of a shout and stuff, whereas Lenny is a bit more measured in the dugout. Limbrick's a bit more energetic. I would say Gavin Skelton, we've only met him a couple of times. I would say he's happy to remain as a coach. I think one of the first things he said to us was he loves coaching. And I get the sense from speaking to the players that he is a really impressive, experienced coach who just loves to coach. A bit like Anthony Sweeney in a sense, who was always a bit reluctant.
Tony, yeah, when you
Yeah,
mentioned it's a
yeah,
ship for Tony.
it was. It was a real shame. I think that maybe left a bit of even more ill feeling in the summer, wasn't it? When Kevin Phillips was maybe slightly harshly treated, and then Tony Sweeney, obviously such a legend. But I understand why the new management team would want to, Darren Sarll, it didn't work out for him, of course. Why he would want to bring in his own men. Carl Dickinson obviously is still there, another of the coaches in an increasingly tightly packed dugout. I've got a really favourable impression of Carl Dickinson as well, and Jack, to finally answer your question, I promise not to dance around it for any longer about Limbrick. I would say yes. I think he's never said it explicitly, but I would be surprised if he didn't have aspirations to return to management. I have been super, super impressed with him. Not just his impact on the players, speaking to some of the players, they've been really impressed with what he's offered. But speaking to him, picking his brains about football, he is a really nice man with some really impressive ideas about the game, an interesting background in coaching. He's sort of been there and done a bit of everything. And what better man to learn under than Lenny Lawrence, who has almost 5 decades of experience in coaching. Of course, a lot can change. We know, having covered and supported Hartlepool United, a lot can change in a week, a month, let alone, 4 or 5 months to the end of the season. But I would suggest the plan is for Lenny Lawrence to continue to lead the team until he decides otherwise, or perhaps if things don't go as planned for the remainder of the season, the board decide otherwise. I would suggest, though, it will be Lenny's decision. And then if things remain as they are, Anthony Limbrick, I think, would be the man to replace him. And I know fans were maybe a bit unsure originally when that idea was first floated, but now, having spoken to Anthony Limbrick and gotten to know him a bit, I would be very happy if that was the case if it does happen.
Just to mention as well, because I've got some stats up about the managers that the club have had from the website In the Mad Crowd, which is an excellent source of stats for the club, if anyone's listening and wants to have a read. Kevin Phillips, 17 games. Obviously, it was a very short tenure that he had. A win percentage of 41%. He won 7 of 17, lost 5. That, it is only a small game sample size, if you like. So in fairness, it could have went either way after that. But he was. Did you feel he was treated unfairly? Did you think he was not owed another season? That's a bit much. But did you think he deserved another season to see what he could do?
Sam, do you want to take this content? I would say, just very quickly, yes, I do. I think he did a good job, and I was very surprised by the decision. Obviously, they took a risk with Sal, didn't work out. These things happen. You have to take risks in football. But I was very surprised. I thought he deserved more time.
I did too. I think Sal was waiting in the background to take over that job. I think Raj knew that he'd be available, and I don't know what Kevin Phillips would have had to do to keep the job, but I don't, I think it seems like Sal was already in place for it when at the end of the season. So yeah, it was a shame for Kevin Phillips because he's a good man and a lot of experience on the pitch, and we always need somebody who knows how to score goals, don't we? So yeah, I would have given him a lot longer.
Yeah, I think Sal was sort of linked with the job earlier in the season as well, wasn't he? And I think the one thing Sal had over Kevin Phillips maybe was that more National League experience. He'd obviously gone to the playoffs with Woking and Yeovil as well, so he certainly knows how to have success in the National League. But Kevin Phillips as well, I know it doesn't always work out this way, but he'd had such a successful playing career, especially in the Northeast. I think the players automatically respected him. And I wondered what it would have been like in the summer as well. If I was a player in and around the National League, you would think, especially an attacking player, you would have thought the chance to go and play for someone like Kevin Phillips, Premier League goal scorer. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You just think that would have been you would have thought really attractive to play. I think he would have had a real pulling power that perhaps Sal didn't have. Not to say that I don't think the recruitment was good in the summer, because actually I do think the recruitment was largely pretty good in the summer. But yeah, I wonder if or what Kevin Phillips could have done to keep the job. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. Of course, as I said, my second game was that 7-1 defeat to Gateshead. But he is a young manager still learning his trade, and I think he deserves a lot of respect for going in at the level he did as well. He went in with South Shields, obviously got them promoted to the National League North, and there are plenty of players that have played in the Premier League at an international level that would think that they could begin their management career at a higher level. But Kevin Phillips was happy to come in and cut his teeth in non-league, and I think that certainly redounds to his credit. So It was a little bit
Um,
disappointing in the end, but
the point that you made there, Robbie, that's a good point.
Mm.
It's one of the hardest things that we have as a club because of where we are geographically is attracting players up to the northeast. You know, if you've
Yeah.
or foreign players to come in, if you Hartlepool isn't a destination that springs to people's minds that they want to automatically go to. We know it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, they must be mad, mustn't they?
Yeah, yeah, your dad's brought you as well. But I think obviously being a Southerner, Kevin Phillips being a Southerner, has done that move to the northeast with Sunderland, but also to be able to talk players through that move and how he
Mm.
settled in the northeast. But like you say, a big name like that, an England player, Premier League player, that could have maybe brought us in more players from further afield.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no disrespect to Darren Song again, who I got on well with, but I would rather have played for Kevin Phillips than Darren Sarll because of all that he's achieved in the game. And I think when you're someone like Sarll, who hasn't had a much of a playing career with respect to him, you have a lot more to do to earn the respect of the players. So when things start to go wrong, they're perhaps less inclined to be patient with you, similar to supporters. I think people were more likely to give Kevin Phillips a chance given his long and impressive association with the Northeast. Lenny Lawrence obviously has a hugely impressive managerial CV, so I think he is probably more similar to Kevin Phillips than Darren Song in that regard. I think he certainly has the respect of the players, and I think together with Joe Monks, the head of football, they've got a lot of contacts. I think they work hard to recruit players. I think you obviously saw a decent summer. I think Nathan Sharon's been a really good signing. Adam Campbell starting to look like a good signing as well. And they've obviously they've been proactive in their approach throughout the season. I think that's obviously been a positive. The arrivals of the likes of Luar and Bonswell, the two newest faces to come in. They've tried to take that front foot approach, but it would have been really interesting to see what Kevin Phillips was going to do. And I think the style of play would have been pretty different to what we'd seen under Darren Song as well. He was a striker inevitably. I think we would have seen attacking football, and he also I think wanted to try and build through the thirds, which obviously has its own risks as well. But it would have been interesting to see him given a chance, and I have no doubt, and he's got a tough job on his hands at AFC Filed, by the way, I think, but I have no doubt that he's going to be a successful manager.
It's an interesting point you made there about Kevin Phillips being a striker and obviously that philosophy as a manager then
Mm.
leaning towards the attacking because we've seen that before. I mean, if you remember Colin Cooper coming
Yeah.
in I think it was 2013 because it was when we'd just been relegated from League One. He brought Craig Hignett with him as assistant, and you had that balance of the defending side from Colin Cooper when he was a player, and then that more attacking bent, the I think he was a midfielder, wasn't he? Yeah, Craig Hignett. But he had like that more progressive balance as well, and they balanced each other very well. I think it was a bit of an underrated partnership at the time because when Hignett left, you saw the downside because it didn't seem like Colin Cooper was. I'm not saying he wasn't a good manager because say the two worked well together, but it seemed like the balance was thrown out a bit when Hignett left to go to Middlesbrough, and eventually that led to Colin Cooper leaving the club. And also, interestingly, I mentioned about Mike Newell only having a certain amount of time in the job. He managed 29 games. As I said, it feels like more because of what he achieved. He managed the same amount of games as Keith Curle and Yogi Hughes, and look at the
Mm.
difference in what they achieved. And it's bizarre looking at it that way, isn't it? You see certain managers having certain time in the job and what they've achieved as opposed to other managers. It's very strange. But coming back to the present, you mentioned you've been to Southend, a 0-0 draw. Um, did you feel that was a fair result?
Yeah, I did. I think it was two evenly matched teams in general. I thought Southend would do a little bit better than they have this season, given what they achieved in the previous campaign. Obviously, having had the 10-point deduction, transfer embargo, winding up petitions and whatnot. I thought that given the change of ownership, they might do a little bit better. I think probably because of the ownership struggles, they still have that hangover from the previous regime. They maybe haven't had the time or resources to recruit as they would quite like. There was nothing in the game, to be honest, Jack. I felt Pools were probably always in control of the contest. As we've seen in recent weeks, it's become sort of a trademark, similar to against Barnet. They were very well organised out of possession, and they're happy really to say, if you can play through us, then good luck to you. And Southend really didn't have an answer for that. I mean, Southend's one real chance came at the beginning of the second half when Josh Walker hit the post, and that came from when Pools turned themselves around because a poor pass from David Ferguson, a poor touch from Adam Campbell, and suddenly Pools were susceptible to the counter attack. They obviously don't have that much pace in their back four, particularly when Dan Dodds is not in the side. So that was the one time that they were really exposed. Pools had a few half chances and then one really gilt-edged chance through Adam Campbell. Felt as though, similar to Lenny Lawrence, it was a point gained. You can't go away from home to a club with a proud history of being in the Football League, almost 7,000 fans as well, difficult atmosphere to contend with. We saw Pools go to York a few weeks ago and probably struggled to cope with the atmosphere. They certainly did a lot better this time around. Of course, it only becomes a really good point if you can back it up with positive results moving forward. Pools have obviously got a really tough run over the festive period. Yeovil, Gateshead, Oldham, and then Barnet. All of those sides are in the top seven. They've all gone really well this season. If you can win against Yeovil, the point against Southend becomes a really superb result. If you lose against Yeovil, then you run the risk of being as many as 7 points adrift of the playoffs all over again. But whether they win or lose, I still feel that there is more hope for the remainder of the campaign. I mean, I think under Sal, one of the issues I certainly felt as both a fan and a reporter, we were going to games and I just never felt like we were going to get a result. I mean, we were talking about the Rochdale game earlier. You think when we went to Forest Green, I just never felt like we were going to get a result. Whereas under Lenny Lawrence, we went to Solihull, we hosted Barnet, a couple of the form sides of the league, and I went there, or rather, I went to Prestige Group Stadium, Victoria Park, when we played Barnet, and I felt like we were going to get a result. And I think that there probably is a similar belief amongst the players as well. So in the end, I think it was a point game, but Pools will need to back it up, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned the festive periods. We've spoken about it before on the podcast. Yeovil are now in this in seventh position in the playoffs. Gateshead fourth, Oldham fifth, and then Barnet obviously top of the tree. And we'll
Don't
go on
remind
to.
us, Jack. Don't remind
I
us.
know, yeah. Unfortunately, that is what we've got ahead of us. And Sam, I'll come to you. Do you think? I keep asking this on the show, and it seems like an obvious question to ask: is playoffs realistic?
I think so. I mean, we like you say, four very tough games, but at the end of it, if we do well in these next four games, we could be flying. And we're only 4 games away from getting excited about promotion again, aren't we? We always have optimism, we always have hope, and yeah, I think if we get stuck into this Christmas period, there's another lot more in the tank for us to get up there.
I would just add to that as well. If we can get through the Christmas period, there's a really favourable run of games. We always say there's no easy games in the National League. Of course, that's true, but I think we play the likes of Maidenhead, Braintree, Sutton, Tamworth, Wealdstone in between January the 11th and February the 11th or whatever it is. I think all of those teams, bar Sutton, are in the bottom half. I think a couple of them are in the bottom four as well. On paper, at least, you would think that those would be really winnable games, and you'd probably rather play the sides in a relegation scrap around Christmas or the New Year than you would towards the end of the season when they're fighting for their lives. So if Pools can come through this run relatively unscathed, if you'd said to me, even if they're 6 points adrift of the top seven come full time on January the 11th against Barnet, then I think they've got every chance. Because I don't know if you guys would agree with this. I would say that the squad, it feels to me like the squad is pretty good on paper. I feel like the squad is better probably than what they had last year. I would say it looks to me to be a squad capable of finishing in the top seven.
I don't think there's any doubt that that squad should be in and around, if not in the top seven, certainly should be competing for the top
Yeah.
seven. I mean, at the start of the season, I said playoffs. I thought the playoffs were a realistic target. I wasn't expecting to run at title. I wasn't expecting to run necessarily a top three, but I did think if we didn't reach the top seven with this squad, it could be seen as a failure, realistically. You mentioned that favourable run. Looking at the fixtures there, oh, Tamworth on a Tuesday night. That sounds horribly familiar. But other than that, yep, you've got Wealdstone, Woking, Braintree, Sutton, Maidenhead, Altrincham, and Aldershot. That takes you up to the end of February. And as you said, that there are a lot of favourable fixtures in there. Um, and the end of the season, I've mentioned that I think last week. Those last four games,
Mm,
Oldham,
tough.
Gateshead, Rochdale, and Forest Green.
Well,
Absolute.
let's hope we've already wrapped up the league title by then, shall we?
That is the ultimate optimism, isn't it? I mean, I did mention as well last week, if we win, we don't have to win all four of those games, but if we even go unbeaten, say, and keep it tight, keep it, on our side, it's good momentum going at the playoffs, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and often that's the case. You do need that momentum, don't you? Especially the National League playoffs. I mean, I think if you to speak to most Pools fans, if you were offered sixth or seventh, they'd take that, wouldn't they? But of course,
Absolutely.
that then means you're going to have to play an away quarter final. It is really, really difficult to win the playoffs, having to play three rounds and having to go away from home. But if you've got that momentum, and often there's one side that comes from the second half of the season from relatively speaking nowhere and gets into the top seven, and suddenly other teams start sitting up and taking notice because they are perhaps the form side. We've spoken already about the atmosphere that Hartlepool United fans can create, not just at Victoria Park, but also away from home. And they obviously have a fantastic away following as well. If the fans are up, the players are confident, then you never know what can happen. The big challenge, of course, it is getting there first of all.
Yeah, Sam, do you concur?
I do. I think, like you say, these next run, if we're going into these next four games over Christmas, and we can take 6, 8 points, then we're taking points off other teams above us, and then we're hitting these teams who are going to be tough at, like Robbie says, at the end of the season when they're fighting for their lives in January. We're going to hit them at the right time as well. There's no reason why we can't go through this and come out looking like a real playoff contender in the next couple of months. He's hoping.
He's open indeed. Thank you very much to you both. Been a very good chat with you. And it is Christmas next week. Merry Christmas to you both. And Merry Christmas to everyone listening. It looks like we'll be taking a hiatus for the next week. If we do find anyone to speak to me who wants to speak on Christmas Day, feel free to get in touch. But either way, have a good Christmas, everyone, and hopefully the next couple of games until we see each other again will go smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
Lovely.
Great
Thank
podcast.
you.